Welcome to Progressive Soup. My name is David Stevenson. I'll be tonight's host. With me, we have Gene Hislop, who is going to talk with us about the specific issue of immigration and customs enforcement and how it relates to Danbury. Now, in the future, we're going to get together and talk about the broader issue of immigration, both in Danbury and in America. But tonight, we're going to focus in on that one particular issue. Gene, how did you get involved with this issue?
Well, I started getting involved in immigrants' rights about 3 or 4 years ago. I was really moved by some immigrants that I had met. I had been living in Rhode Island for about 3 years, had taken a break from Danbury, and I lived in a very small town which had no diversity, and I found that I missed the diversity that Danbury had so much. And so when I moved home, I was just in my glory, with all the wonderful opportunities that the multicultural aspects of Danbury provide. And slowly but surely, I started seeing those things that I love being challenged by our local administration, starting with the volleyball ordinance, the arrest of the Danbury 11. Actually, I think the arrest of the Danbury 11 is really when I got my start. I started seeing that the people that I knew that I, rode the bus with and lived near, and they could all be at risk of very anti-immigrant policies and actions that our local administration were taking. So,
now this actually was brought into fruition recently, this immigration and customs enforcement, but it was voted in about 2 years ago. We know that we have a different administration now, and we're hearing that there's a different attitude and a different set of policies in dealing with immigration. What were they thinking back then when they brought this, when they created this, when they agreed to have it ultimately come into effect?
I would say they started talking about it about 2 years ago, but it was actually just voted in really about a year ago. Mm-hmm. What was going through their minds when they did that? I think, first of all, political expediency. I think anti-immigrant policies have been very convenient for the Republican Party to latch onto from the beginning. I mean, I think we're seeing right now in a lot of the hysteria on other topics that anything that can hit people on a very emotional level and a fear level, is really a launch pad for a lot of political stunts. And I think ICE Access at its inception was nothing more than a political stunt for the local Republican Party. I think obviously Joe Cava was the one to bring it to the council, and I would say it's pretty safe to assume, or beyond assume, it's pretty safe to assert that obviously he didn't just find it on the internet, although that's something he said. I think that it was brought to his attention by people who are anti-immigrant in Danbury and who don't appreciate the diversity that Danbury brings. So I think that brought it to their attention. They realized it would stir a lot of controversy, it would distract from some other issues, and that it would also get a lot of voters that are very passionate out to the polls. I think that we've got a majority of people in Danbury who have been here all their lives and might be opposed to some change, and I believe that Danbury should welcome change. But
change is always a tough thing for everybody to take. Some of us are a little bit more amenable to change than others. But now Danbury's had such a history of groups of immigrants, large groups of immigrants coming here, settling in, learn the language, assimilate into the culture, live in certain parts of the city. Town Hill Avenue, for example, has been a great area where immigrant groups have come, settled in, they feel comfortable being amongst their people that speak their language and that are like them to begin with, and eventually they assimilate into the culture and gravitate out into the community. We saw that with the Portuguese, we saw that with the Southeast Asian cultures. Is there anything different about the immigrants now than these other groups of immigrants we've seen?
I think that, if you wanted to go into that, I think that you could find there's not difference at the core. I think Southeast Asian, specifically from like India, might have had some background in English already. I mean, definitely people from Europe who immigrated, might have had some background in English, at least from certain countries. Obviously, like Italy might have been a little bit different. I think it's also people's fear of anything that looks different than them, that seems to be the hot button. I think that's mainly, and I think that obviously the numbers have been larger in this wave of immigration. I believe
Have
that
they? Okay.
I think that also possibly the economic situation, but we're getting off, on topics. I think the main thing to keep in mind is whether or not there were any difference, which there's not. These people are just like us, and they're just like our ancestors, and they're just trying to do the same thing that our ancestors did. However, whether or not there were issues, it's just become a politically expedient thing for the Republican Party locally to capitalize on and to basically distract people from and lie about. And what's happening here is that human lives are hanging in the balance, and our local Latino population is really being exploited, for political gain.
Is there anything to be gained other than political expediency by having Immigrations and Customs Enforcement come in?
No, I think that the administration would, Mayor Boughton and the Republican administration would love you to think that there is. As a matter of fact, that has quite been the spin that they've been putting out there. However, that is not at all the case. Mayor Boughton has been saying that this will make it easier for our police to do their, job cracking down on hardened criminals and violent offenders and such. However, Danbury's crime level has always been relatively very low in comparison with other towns in the area. I think that our police force does a wonderful job, and I question how much easier this is going to make it. Secondly, he said that because of this program and this new program, I should say, and it's focused now on only arresting those who are violent criminals, that it will make it easier for victims of domestic abuse to report crimes that have happened to them, because they won't be afraid of the police arresting them and deporting them to ICE. He's claiming that that's a benefit of this program, but we have things already written into our law, victims protection laws and such, that should be protecting people and have been protecting people from such. If you're a victim of a crime, you have protection automatically. It has happened that people have actually been turned over to ICE when they have reported a crime, when they've been a victim of a crime. However, our laws are supposed to be protecting against that already. This is not going to change that. So I can't see many benefits to this program for our city at all. Not at all.
Does there seem to be some sort of divisiveness? Which you mentioned divisiveness and finding a scapegoat for whatever problems that may be in the city. And as you mentioned, the crime rate in Danbury, and I've been here 35 years, the crime rate has always been very low in Danbury. It's a very, we've always had a great police department that have done a good job, that know neighborhoods. They get out of their cars very frequently. They're not just driving around inside the cars. They're out with the people, out talking, out listening, out finding out things. How do you think the immigrants that have been here, say, for a generation or two, because now I'm third generation Irish, and I remember from hearing from my grandparents that when they came here, they were treated very badly. You remember the whole thing of Irish need not apply and all things like that. So I understand that immigrant populations that come to America, and to Danbury specifically, have a lot of have a very hard row to hoe. They stick with it. They work hard. They assimilate. They become Americans. It wasn't a long road to hoe for my grandparents become Americans. Not as hard as it is now. It seems like the hoops are many, many, many to jump through for the more recent immigrants. But how do you see the immigrant populations that have come here in the past? What's their attitude toward our more recent immigrants?
Well, I mean, I think that there's, opinions on both sides within older generations of immigrants and newer generations of immigrants. I have seen, I think that our federal elections, and I don't want to get off too much on this topic, but the federal elections and the number of Latinos that turned out to vote for President Obama, hoping that the new administration would actually bring meaningful immigration reform, is evidence that comprehensive immigration reform is something very much desired by not only undocumented, but people who have been here for 1, 2, 3 generations who identify with that issue. However, it doesn't seem like on a federal level those desires have yet been met. And with Janet Napolitano now in charge of the Department of Homeland Security, she's the one who actually moved this quote-unquote new MOA and pushed it through and made the changes that she said we're going to make this a better program to participate in. And I don't think we're seeing the change that was promised. I think that the new MOA is really just the old MOA with a different label stuck on it.
Now, once I understand that, the change, the shift has been away from focusing on people that have come here illegally and whatever crimes they have committed in coming here, and focusing more on companies that hire them and holding them accountable.
That has been a shift of immigration thought, as far as like the immigration platform now, or the method of enforcement has been a shift. But that is not what the MOA is. The MOA, the Memorandum of Understanding between Danbury and ICE is the focus of it is supposed to be on making it easier for police to identify and apprehend hardened criminals, people guilty of violent offenses, drug trafficking, murder, and that. However, even the old Memorandum of Understanding and the new Memorandum both had pretty big holes in it, which is really what's disturbing.
Leaving
for instance,
a lot of flexibility for
because,
interpretation.
Because they'll say, for instance, perpetrators of federal crimes such as murder, drug trafficking, and other offenses. That's pretty vague. What are those other offenses? And it says one of the terms it uses is criminal alien, but it doesn't define what means, what actually is a criminal alien. What is the criteria for this? We have never actually been able to get a very clear understanding of what that is. This MOA leaves big holes and leaves immigrants activists feeling very afraid. It looks like a wolf in sheep's clothing to us. It seems like the other one was pretty blatant that it was almost civil rights violations, and it certainly was operated in a manner that led to civil rights violations. However, this MOA I don't think is going to be much different. I think it's just being held under wraps.
We're going to talk about that and some other things when we come back from our public service announcement. This is Progressive Soup.
Dad? Mom? It's me.
We gotta talk.
We have to talk about sex. It's okay. I can handle it.
Can you?
Talk to me about sex. Tell me how you feel.
Tell me you want me to wait. I may roll my eyes,
Act all bored, but I'm listening.
I'll hear you. So talk to me about sex.
because my friends do.
It's all over the internet.
Now it's your turn.
Tell me, son.
You have the world at your feet.
Or, honey, the sky's the limit. Tell me what you want from me.
An education.
Family. A career. Happiness. Tell me to wait to have sex. I know you're nervous, weirded out. Me too.
Me too.
Me too. But we gotta do this.
Tell your kids you want them to wait till they're married to have sex. And talk with them early and often, so they'll have a better chance at success. Visit this website for help making the conversation easier.
Come on, Dad. Speak up, Mom. You can do it.
We're back. Welcome to Progressive Soup. I'm David Stevenson. I have Jean Hislop on with, and she's going to answer some questions about immigration and the new Immigration and Customs Enforcement, which has come into Danbury and beginning now. What are some obvious bad things that can happen based on this new program? What are some things that you clearly see as that are going to happen?
Well, I think to see that, we have to actually go back a little and say what has already happened. The government oversight, has actually done a lot of fact-finding on how this 287G in the past has been implemented across the country in various communities. The worst extreme example of that would obviously be Sheriff Joe Arpaio in Maricopa County in Arizona, I mean, the human rights violations, torture, cover-ups of deaths, and the deaths in detention centers, extreme human rights abuses, and they're allowed to continue because the federal government has given Joe Arpaio the ability to carry out federal immigration acts. Those have already happened, and they've been happening across the country.
Some of our audience doesn't understand about what detention centers are and how they had to compare and contrast them with regular prisons. Could you explain a little further about that?
Well, detention centers can be actually housed, they can be partially in regular prisons. There are some detention centers that are in regular prisons. This is a very detailed topic, but suffice it to say that mainly detention centers are not always federally run. Sometimes they're privatized, so they don't actually have the same kind of level of monitoring. And they're basically where immigrants can basically sit for a very long time without legal representation, without a trial, because they are not being protected by the same rights as American citizens. And this has been going on for ages. And now, obviously, when we are turning over an immigrant to ICE, they are likely to be housed in these detention centers until they are removed for deportation.
Would it be a stretch to say that you could compare people that are detained under this way to what we call enemy combatants in times of war? Do they have any rights at all?
I'm
Are
not.
their families notified, or do they have right of representation?
It's a much more murky situation, and it's something we could definitely discuss in the future show. The treatment of people in detention centers, but it would be similar. The thing is that what we have to understand with this memorandum of agreement is that there are a lot of big holes in here. Not only the definition of a criminal alien, not only what could get a person arrested, but the fact is, in this specific memorandum of understanding, certain things have been taken out of it that immigrants' rights activists and civil rights activists really needed. For instance, in this day and age with this new agreement, there is no accountability to the public. For instance, now when somebody has been arrested and they are handed over to ICE, it is no longer a matter of public record. So any kind of statistics that we were hoping to gather about racial profiling, abuse, anything like that, it's going to be much harder to dig up that information because, unfortunately, the government has said, okay, once they're in our hands, it's out of yours, and we don't have to tell you any of that anymore. And there used to be a lot more transparency. So we've had organizations, government oversight organizations. We've had the Police Federation talking about how this has destroyed communities. It has destroyed trust between local law enforcement and our immigrant community. It has, obviously created huge problems with racial profiling throughout the country, numerous reports of it. And now all of a sudden we've seemed to surrender this to the federal government and said, well, they're not going to report it anymore, and that's okay. This is somehow a program that our city should participate in. Another problem is we still have no cost analysis on what this is going to run the city. As far as the agreement goes, as far as I know, it is uncapped. So whatever costs came to the Danbury taxpayer, it could be uncapped, and we have no cost analysis or estimate.
So the citizens of Danbury, the taxpayers, will foot the cost of incarceration for people that are arrested in Danbury? Is that Is that possible?
We're footing the cost for the training, the mechanism of arrest. They won't be incarcerated in Danbury for long. They'll be held. ICE will be coming to pick them up and take them to the federal detention centers. But as far as investigation, arrest, all the other incidentals and such, that will be a burden to the Danbury taxpayer, and we have no cost estimate of that. So, in other words, the program is not a good benefit for anybody. I mean, we're going to be leaving our Latino population open to racial profiling with no oversight or ability to really protect them, to prove it, to have oversight over our government and how they're handling this. It's bad for the Danbury taxpayer as far as not having a cost analysis is going to be a lot of money to the Danbury taxpayer. And it's also really destructive to the fabric of the community because immigrants, whether or not they say that immigrants are going to be pulled over for minor infractions, this has been happening even before we signed the MOA. So we have no reason to believe Mayor Boughton, his administration, or Janet Napala's administration that they are going to do anything different than what they've been doing all along. There is no evidence for that. So whether or not immigrants are going to feel so-and-so better now that we have these suggested protections in this MOA remains to be seen, and it's not going to take too many mistakes to prove to the immigrant community that this is no different than the other one. When people are still being handed over to ICE because they haven't worn their seatbelt, when people are still being handed over to ICE because of drunken driving, when people are still being handed over to ICE for other minor violations, it's not going to take long for the proof to be in the pudding and for the local immigrant community to realize that they cannot trust the police in the city. So reporting of crimes will be down, and it will destroy the fabric of our community, not only its multicultural diversity and beauty, but also, honestly, our safety as a community.
So it actually, this may make it more difficult for our local law enforcement to do their job if they don't have people on the street that are trusting them to tell them things.
That's right, and in the long run, that has been happening since immigration enforcement has been taken over by local authorities. The Police Federation has released numerous statements saying, we're diverting our attention and our resources to do immigration enforcement, and it's taking our attention and our resources away from protecting the entire community. And what has happened is that towns that have had this program have actually seen an increase in crime in many cases.
Did you mention that that these prisons prisons that they're incarcerated in are privately run rather than
Many of them are privatized and basically by some of the same companies that have been doing detention centers for the non-combatants, as you said. There are numerous abuses. I mean, women being chained to beds in labor has been a common practice. People being tortured, specifically Sheriff Joe Arpaio.
This is in Arizona again.
Yeah, he actually had immigrants strapped to chairs and was tasering them, for an immigration violation. Obviously, I'm not saying that that's going to happen in Danbury's jail, but the fact is we're handing them over into federal hands, and federal hands are turning them over into privatized hands. And unfortunately, when you do that, there's very little oversight. The UN has tried numerous times to actually enter and to inspect various detention centers, and it has been turned away, immigrant detention centers. So that tells you something right there.
So the world's looking at Americans and knowing that we have more people in prison per capita than I think any country in the world. I think if we're not, we're very close to having more people locked up either in local prisons or in federal prisons per capita than any country in the world. And I think maybe part of that is the fact that we're privatizing our prisons, and like any good company, the more people that they are taking care of, the more money they make.
It's a business. As a matter of fact, getting back to the racial profiling under the 287G, in some of the communities where 287G has been happening, and where anybody makes friends with ICE, let's say, any community that has become very friendly with ICE. There was a community in Los Angeles where very blatant evidence was found that ICE officers were actually, the executive officers were actually instructing their underlings to actually commit racial profiling. There was one case where a man was pumping gas at a gas station, and he was Latino, and the higher-up asked his officer to go up and ask the person for documents, and he said, why? I have no probable cause. He's just pumping gas. And he said, because we have a quota to meet. And this has actually been released. The officer told the story. This has been investigated. It was found to be true. They were hanging out at gas stations and questioning people for documents without probable cause. And so there's no specific protection that we've been able to find, just vague terms and promises without any specific protections in this new MOA that would stop that from happening here.
Seems like a lot of potential for abuse. And I would have to, in my mind's eye, I would have to reach out to all the other immigrant groups that have come to America and ask themselves the question, including the Irish, and ask themselves the question, if this had happened when my family was coming here, how would I have felt? And try to apply that perhaps to what we're seeing now, and put themselves in that position and act according to how they would have acted in response to these things that are happening now.
I agree. Thank you. That's exactly the point. We have to understand that we are here by a happy accident if we come from immigrant stock, and we are blessed to live in the country and have the liberties that we have. And really, we should look at our Latino and Southeast Asian and Asian and African immigrants as our younger brothers, and if anything, we should be fostering them in and welcoming them in and helping them assimilate rather than trying to push them away, because really their story is ours.
I have a friend who teaches ESL classes in the evening, and he loves to talk about how people will come to the classes. He speaks Spanish, so he teaches to Spanish people, teaches English to them. And he loves to talk about how these people, they've gone out and they've worked long, long days, but they just have that extra energy in them to come to his classes because they want so much to learn how to speak English.
Yeah.
They want to be Americans.
Honestly.
Just like all the generations of immigrants that have come before them. No difference.
Absolutely. I mean, I learned Portuguese, not fluently, but I've learned a little bit of conversational Portuguese and enough to, talk with somebody and be understood, although, they do it with a smirk because my Portuguese is awful. However, one thing I'll find is, they'll be talking about a song, or a song will be on the radio, and it's an American song, and the first thing they want to know is, what does this mean? And that's such a natural thing when you hear a pretty song or a fun song or something, to want to know what it means. They do want to learn because they're living in our culture, and they're taking our culture back to their own countries, and that's not even a miraculous fact. I mean, they're sending songs home to their friends over the internet, and they want to be part of our culture.
We're going to have to break from here now. We'll have you back, Jean. We'll have you back to talk about the broader issue of the history of immigration and some more specifics about immigrations and customs enforcement. We'll be monitoring that too as it unfolds, and monitoring the good and the bad of it. So thank you very much. This is Progressive Soup. I'm David Stevenson. Had Jean Hislop on. Thank you and good night.